anything that you care about in business, anything at all, you can notice whether you've got more of it or less of it, if you've got it or not got it. Somehow you can tell. Because if you can't tell whether you've got it or not, it can't be that important. Well, what about customer engagement? How do you define that? Well, you can say, okay, if I had a whole bunch of it versus not enough of it, what would I see and hear differently in these two cases? And that's where you start to find out what your observables are. And people will say, well, yeah, but I can't really measure that. And that's because you're using the wrong meaning of the word measure.
Welcome to the People-Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello and welcome, listeners, to another episode of the People-Powered Solutions podcast. Today, we talk performance. We know that the key to a thriving culture is ensuring that organizations are extra clear on what that performance standard is for the different roles within the organization. And the way we convey that is through having some very robust and formalized performance development programs. So today we welcome Thomas Cox. Welcome, Thomas.
Hey, Lori. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
So excited to talk all things performance and anything else that might come to mind. But before we dive into that, I'd love for you to share with our listeners how Thomas got to doing what Thomas does.
So depending on how far back we want to go, let's start with my technical career. I was a database architect. I worked for Oracle Corporation and did a bunch of other for PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM. And so you had to understand the business really well to design the database for it, which meant I had a lot of like interviewing people and understanding requirements. And I was very technical. I was a brilliant jerk. Emphasis on the jerk, I got to get it technically right. It's very important to get it technically right. It's like, well, people don't get along with me. It's like, well, they need to just stop taking themselves seriously, whatever. Yeah. And anyway, I did fine. Okay. I did good databases. I'm not sure I was very fun to work around for about 15 years. And at some point I plateaued. I'm like, these databases all look alike now. It's like, you give me a problem, I've solved it 3 or 4 times already. It's just not challenging. Where's the challenge? And I realized, well, for me, the challenge was people. Because I wasn't the only brilliant jerk. I promise you, I was working in IT. There's nothing more pathetic than a bunch of engineers sitting around a table trying to solve a people issue because we're not equipped. And I realized, man, if I could figure that out, it'd be like bringing in fire to my tribe. I'd be a hero and things would be better and we wouldn't be shivering through the night and we could like get along and actually make things work. We'd save so much time. So I figured, well, I have this degree in psychology I got from the University of Chicago years ago, and I
just tucked away somewhere in your back pocket.
I wanted a broad liberal arts education so that I could figure out what to do next, and then I ended up doing this deep dive into databases afterwards. And I thought, people, I bet other industries are going to need this too. So I just said, I'm going to be a student of this. And I spent 20 years starting off really badly. Like I found out within a few years that I'd gone from knowing nothing to being a toxic boss in 2005. And I was like, that was a slap in the face. I'm like, what?
I'm stopping you right there because otherwise I'm going to want to come back. But so what do you define as a toxic boss?
Oh, someone who makes people's performance worse, not better. Someone who their best contribution would be to shut up and stay away from the office, maybe. Someone who lacks self-awareness and thinks they're doing the right thing, but aren't. And by the way, I don't know if you know what it feels like to make a mistake. People often say, well, it feels embarrassing. So no. That's what it feels like to realize you've made a mistake. But when you're actively making the mistake, it feels exactly like doing the right thing. And so, yeah. And so, none of us set out to be toxic bosses, yet some of us manage it. And so I like, wow, okay. So clearly everything I've been doing this self-study on, I can't take it all seriously. It's not all created equal. And that's when I realized that about 95% of what's written about leadership is either useless or actually counterproductive.
Interesting.
That was shocking. And so I have to be a very skeptical consumer of this material. I got to test it. I got to like really look carefully. And I found a very few excellent sources. Peter Drucker, Fernando Flores, some of the stuff that Daniel Pink does is incredibly helpful. Manager tools, the website manager tools, they're free podcasts, absolutely phenomenal. Those I think you can hang your hat on. But so much else is written by people like me, management consultants, who like, oh, I need to write a book so people will know that I exist and I can send it out like a business card. And, or you'll interview somebody like this guy Sloot, he's a great CEO. He turns around companies, he scales companies, amazing guy. I listened to a 2-hour podcast with this guy, and nothing he said was actionable.
Wow.
Nothing he said could be translated by another human into their own unique circumstance and applied. He was just like, he was talking very honestly and candidly. Like, I got to move fast. You got to confront problems. I'm like, yeah, got to confront problems. Okay. Any advice on how to spot them and how to no,
how to figure out which ones you're avoiding and which
nothing
ones
useful.
Nothing. Okay. So you lost 2 hours of your life is what I'm hearing.
Well, it serves as a great counterexample. And I got to make sure I don't sound like that. Right. Because if you ask, well, what do you do? And I'd think, oh yeah, let me think, what do I do? And it'd be the stream of consciousness stuff about what's in my head as I'm acting, but it isn't translatable into other people taking action. And my superpower, I've come to realize, comes from the fact that I have Asperger's syndrome and I don't understand people intuitively at all. And I never have. And so like most normal people, as I understand it, at least some of the time, your intuition tells you what to do and how to do it, and it's just when you run into these other people around you who don't make sense, but you still have to work with them. Or it's like, well, this worked my last job. Why is it not working now? And you're trying to feel your way through with your intuition. See, I have the great strength that I never had any intuition ever on any of this stuff. And I had to figure it all out from principles and analysis. And thank God I got pretty good in analytic skills doing the database work.
I was going to say your background in database.
Develop that muscle. Now I get to apply it over here.
Absolutely.
And it's a very little bit like Winston Churchill when he was young. He had a terrible stutter. And he was advised by his career counselor to find a job that didn't involve talking. The Winston Churchill, the greatest orator of the 20th century. And so what happened is he didn't like that fate. And so he really worked hard to overcome the deficit. And in my own much humbler way, I've worked to overcome a deficit. And that's developed a strength that's seen me through to understanding how people work at a level of detail and depth that I find most people don't realize that they need until they hit that person that they can't make sense of, or that situation that doesn't yield to their intuitive understanding. And that's where I come in.
Work to overcome a deficit. That's kind of a good nugget of wisdom there. I think people who have anxiety, people who have conditions that are not curable, if you will.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes the most crippling problem. And then the work you do to overcome that develops a skill and a muscle and a sensitivity into other people that can create an entire career for you and let other people out of jail.
Absolutely. Let other people out of jail. But I mean, sometimes there's different types of people. We all know that. But I've seen those who will use that as a crutch, though. Well, it's because I have ADHD, or it's because I have, and it's right. Okay. That's the thing, though. You can't use these conditions as a crutch. These deficits as a crutch. These deficits are your cue to say, this isn't going away. What I do have in my control is to develop the management techniques. How do I adapt, and how do I continue to live and strive and evolve while managing this and while not minimizing its impact on my day-to-day living, right?
Right. And to be clear, not every deficit turns into your great strength. I've got several, one of which is I have a fairly weak grasp of detail. I don't like slogging through details. I never have. Shocking in a database guy. I get it.
Who worked in data and IT. Wow.
Yes. And my solution to that was, rather than slog through the data at a granular level, I would do enough of that to understand what the pattern was. And then the pattern was the thing I would hold. And so I would use my analysis abilities to translate the facts into a fact pattern. And then I could carry the pattern around as this nice little compact thing that would fit in my head. Perfect. But when it comes to like, okay, let's review all the expenses for the year, I'm like, oh no, please, I don't want to gouge my eyes out. Yeah. It's just not my thing. And so the ways you handle weaknesses, one is you confront it and see if it needs to be turned into a strength. And number two, you backfill it with another person or a technique. Yeah. And In my case, I have a virtual assistant who, if you go to principlesu.com, that's my favorite free assessment these days. Principlesu.com, Ray Dalio created it. And I show up as very weak on detail orientation. And my assistant is pegged all the way to the right, like 90 some percentile on details. I'm like, marriage made in heaven right there.
Absolutely. You're touching on something really important though. When it comes to, I like that backfilling with you outsource, you backfill with a person or you develop a technique. I'm an everything DISC licensed partner. I am a huge fanatic of all of their suite of tools. But ultimately, why am I a huge fanatic? Because they enable you to not only identify your own needs, preferences, and just how you operate and what you're wired to do, but you're able to identify what are you not so great at. Then you can make that call whether I need to outsource or develop a technique. I'm with you. My style in particular is someone who is, I like to wing it. I prefer to move forward and be in action and work towards results than to stay stuck in that overthinking, troubleshooting. Let's have a plan A, B, C, D, E in the event that not that it's actually even going to happen, but just in the event that something goes off, then we'll have a way to fix it. That's not how I operate, but I have surrounded myself my entire life with people who are literally my polar opposite on that in the quadrants. So I've surrounded myself with people who are my polar opposite to make sure that they're the yin to my yang. They're supplementing where I know I'm not great at, and they're stopping me from a risk management perspective. When the risk is extra high, they're saying, wait a minute, Lori, have you thought of A, B, C, and D? Just want to play the devil's advocate. And sometimes they've caught me and I've been like, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. Thank you. Now I can adapt. So just the power of using these types of tools, not to pigeonhole people or to condone bad behavior, but rather
to get the best out of them. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So here's a nugget for you. I can't remember where I stole this from. I'm like a magpie. I steal all over the place. Or like an artist. I steal like an artist. Yeah. It goes like this. We all make mistakes, but we don't ship defects. We all make mistakes, but we don't ship defects. So it's not that I need me to be perfect or I need you to be perfect, but I do need us to be perfect. And so, I will move fast and break things, and I will crank out an 80% good draft faster than you can like go get a cup of coffee. But then when it comes to the final mile, oh my God, please, anyone
take
help
me past that finish line.
Yeah.
Make sure that you've done all the finishing work on it.
I get to 80%. I just want to hit publish and go home. And I've done that a few times and paid the price for it. And say, okay, so clearly that's not how we do things. So we had promised your listeners and viewers something about performance. And we're touching on that now, that a properly constituted team is going to have enough variety and diversity that we don't have a bunch of blind spots all lined up where everyone shares this blind spot and therefore the whole team is blind there. No. We embrace diversity simply because with diversity comes strength. But diversity only becomes strength in a context of psychological safety, in a context where you as the leader are making sure that people don't feel like bad or defensive about having, being imperfect, being flawed, having a blind spot. We've all got bloody blind spots. Come on. And so one of the things I teach, I think you do as well, is how do you create psychological safety? And in fact, I recommend putting into the job description of every manager a couple of things like maintaining unit cohesion and ensuring a culture of psychological safety in your unit. And then you're gonna be like, okay, great, I'll get right on that. How exactly do I go about doing it? Any tips for me there? And that's where I turn to the work of Amy Edmondson, and she actually has a specific checklist of things you can do to help create psychological safety on a team. Would you like to hear them?
I love specificity. I love something that people can take home. So absolutely, let's go through that checklist.
Okay, so there's 5 things. Number 1 is you got to model curiosity. It means you can't get furious. You got to stay curious. Things are on fire. Okay, well, first follow the checklist to lock down the emergency, and then it's not whose fault is it. It's how'd that happen? How do we prevent the next one of those? What do we need to learn from this? It's like, well, we just paid tuition, people. Let's go to class. Because I'll tell you, another of my phrases, again, don't know where I stole it from. Tuition is mandatory, learning is optional.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
constantly paying tuition. We're constantly paying the price of failure and mistake and letdowns and screw ups and on and on. Okay, so we're paying anyway. How about we show up to class and take some notes? And then we don't have to take the class a second time and a third time and a fourth time, because life will put us through this class until we learn this lesson. Number one, modeling curiosity. And that creates the need for speaking up. It's like, hey guys, any idea what's going on? Huh? What do you think? And the more you're curious and asking questions and really listening to the answers, the more people feel like, well, I've got a thought. And someone else speaks up first, and the boss is really respectful and interested. And who's different? Who else has a thought? And then, well, I've got. And then finally, you notice that Fred hasn't said anything. Everyone else has spoken, and Fred's just sitting there thinking. Okay, this is point number 4: conversational turn taking. Doing these out of order, where you're like, oh, so Fred, I know
we skip right to 4 here. Okay,
I had to because of the flow of the conversation. So you're modeling curiosity, creating the need to speak up. You're also establishing your own fallibility. Hey, look, we all make mistakes, including me, but we don't ship defects. So how do we make sure that we don't do that? We just had this problem. We're in cleanup now, but how do we learn from it? That's curiosity. And like I know I contributed to this at least somewhat. I must have, or it wouldn't have happened. Did I not properly supervise you? Did I not properly insist on controls and quality? Like, I know I've got a piece of this. Probably some of you have a piece of this too. I know I'm imperfect, and I want us to improve our process. And then number 3, framing the work as a learning problem, not an execution problem. Even in high execution environments, Toyota production system, they're making cars, they're executing on a daily basis, but they treat every mistake, pull the andon cord, stop the conveyor belt. Why? To figure out why things went sideways just now, and how do we learn from this? Give you a lovely example of switching from execution to learning. There was a coach, I think it was UCLA, no, it was University of Connecticut women's basketball, and I'm sorry I don't remember the coach's name, but they were dominating and unexpectedly found themselves down at halftime in the semifinals, and they'd never been down at halftime all season. And they're kind of freaking out. Like, have we lost it? What's wrong? And she says, no, this is wonderful. They're like, it is? When they say the blessings in disguise, that's a heck of a disguise. So what do you mean there, boss? And well, look, we're going into the finals after this, and we might be down to the half then too. It's like, we haven't been down at the half all season. We got to practice how we come back from being down at the half. Let's get serious. Like, let's go to class here. Let's treat this as a learning problem. Like, oh yeah, okay. How do we use this to get better? Not we're screwing up, we're bad, we're wrong, we're broken, we shouldn't ever be here, and we're here. Learning process. So number 1, model curiosity. Number 2, establish your own fallibility. Number 3, frame it as a learning problem, not an execution problem. If you're not a learning organization, you're not going to get better. Number 4, conversational turn taking. You notice, okay, the quiet people, they're not thinking, they're just not quick to share.
Yeah.
Like I've gotten to a point. I used to be the guy who never spoke, and now I'm like, the thought is half formed. I'll start talking now, and I'm just blurting stuff.
Yeah.
I'll just blurt stuff out, and that's not always helpful. And when I notice that people are really quiet, I'm wondering, I wonder if they're even in the same meeting with the rest of us. But you don't want to shame people, so it's like, you seem to be thinking some deep thoughts. Is there anything you're ready to share yet? Notice how I frame that as, are you ready to share yet? Not like, I'm going to put you on the spot and force you to admit that you're daydreaming.
Yeah.
But I am going to call on people who are quiet, and the quiet ones. And 3 or 4 times in a row in the last few years, I've done that. And what's come out of that person, I'm expecting them to like, I was thinking other thoughts. Can you catch me back up on the, no. They're like, I've been thinking. And then what comes out of them is like this incredible analysis. Like, whoa, slow down. Let me take notes. Yeah. Like really thoughtful material. And
that's got to be leader driven, right? Like that's where
you got to pull it out of them, because they'll just sit there thinking the thought and not share it. It's like, come on, you got to add your thoughts to the pool of shared information in between them. It's like, imagine a big pool of water in between us, and we're all placing our thoughts into that pool to make the pool bigger. But you don't throw your stuff in. Absolutely. Trying to like force it.
It's got to be leader based, but it can be also peer based. Like if you know that colleague that maybe after the meeting is coming to you and saying, I should have said this, that, the other thing. Well, there's ways to kind of nurture that
Yeah.
psychological safety and help them kind of contribute in the moment.
Yeah, where it's going to add more value to the team more quickly.
Absolutely.
And then I promise you 5 points. The fifth one is
Yeah,
a sensitivity to emotions. And I think I showed you that a little bit when I said, hey, do you have anything you're ready to share? If someone's looking down, they're looking excited, whatever you're seeing on their face, if you say something along the lines of, it seems like, and then you just name what you think is going on. And if you're wrong, they'll correct you.
absolutely.
And, I'll say something like, Lori is smiling, as Fred's talking. And that's an invitation for Lori to speak up, or Lori will just smile some more and not say anything. But it's an opening, right?
And it also helps everyone in that meeting feel seen. And
yes,
right,
yes,
and right away
yes.
they're if I'm seen, then I'm feeling like I'm part of a team, I'm part of something. And as part of that, I need to contribute. I need to pull my weight, and pulling my weight in
Right.
the, in this environment means giving my ideas or weighing in on whatever was presented. Absolutely.
Right. Noticing the hole in the problem. Now, if Fred is going on a great length about something and Barney starts to frown, I'm going to say, so Fred, I'm noticing that Barney's frowning a little bit. Is there something you're ready to share? And, ready to, right? So that if Barney's like, yeah, not yet,
Not yet.
I'm not forcing him, but I'm noticing. And here's what's interesting is I say that, and it's not just Barney who feels seen. Wilma and Betty are going, huh? He didn't say anything. He just had an expression on his face. And Thomas just like noticed it and politely, acknowledged it. Because when you, like, as a public speaker, if you connect with one person in the audience, the whole audience feels connected too, sympathetically. Yeah. When you show the sensitivity to emotion to one person in your meeting, they all notice that, oh yeah, you're tuned into what I call the PQ channel, right? There's the positive intelligence folks have the idea of the positive intelligence quotient, which is like an EQ, if you will. And so there's the fact channel, which is, the data, which is what I used to tune into exclusively back when I was a brilliant jerk. I wasn't all that brilliant though. But then there's this thing called subtext, and there's this framing called context. And apparently those are important too, as I eventually learned. And when you notice them and pay attention to them respectfully and allow them to have space in the room, and you show sensitivity to the emotional reality of the folks in the room, you are creating this thing called psychological safety, where it's like, oh, I'm feeling, you seem, or you can tell, you doesn't have to be in a meeting, it'd be one-on-one. It's like, hey, you seemed a little down in that meeting. You didn't contribute. You kind of frowned. I invited you in. You said, no, not yet. And you were a little late coming in. And is there something going on that I could help with? Or do you need to just talk out with somebody? It's like, I'm here for you, dude. And even if they're not ready to open up, the fact that you notice that they're not their normal self, it's like, validating. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the only universal truth of leadership. Are you ready?
Drop it.
All followers want the same followership experience, regardless of who the leader is. All followers want the same exact thing. It's just that because they're all different humans, they all experience reality differently. So you as the leader have to lead them as unique individuals, but Absolutely. They all want the same subjective reality, and it has two pieces. Piece one is a good enough relationship that I can be my whole self and really bring myself to the work. My boss knows my strengths and weaknesses, cares about me as a unique human being, not just a cog in the machine, that there's enough of a relationship that I actually want to make my boss happy. We want to be cared about. We want to be seen as human. That's half of the job of a leader right there, is building a relationship. You do that through asking, listening, including coaching and encouraging. Those 5 behaviors. Thank you, Pete Friedis, in the book To Our Manager. Amazing. The other half, if you're ready for it, do we need to dwell on this first, or should I go to the other half?
No, I want to come back to those 5. I want to come back to so many parts of this conversation, but
I've been working on this for 20 years. I'm trying to get it all out.
I know there's so many nuggets of wisdom, but I want to kind of expand on a few of them. So I'll let you.
Let me finish my promise. Yeah, I said there's a universal.
I have a few questions.
Universal truth of leadership. All followers want the same followership experience of being cared about by the boss as a unique human being, seen through the actions by the boss of asking, listening, including coaching and encouraging. And they want an environment where performance matters, where their contributions matter, that they're putting points on the board, that we're succeeding, that we're shipping, that we're accomplishing. And if all you do is relate all day and create this sort of country club environment where the most important thing is we all get along, but some of us aren't doing any work and others of us are doing twice the work and you don't even seem to notice, and the client, our internal or external clients aren't happy with us and you don't ever talk about it. It's like, can we talk about doing a good job here? Right. And so we call this cluster of behaviors the requiring behaviors. We require excellence. We require performance. And people don't like a boss who doesn't require because they can't feel good about their work.
Exactly. They need to know what's expected of them. They need to
understand crystal
the
clear
difference they make, and they need to have a framework to be able to actively work towards making that difference and having that impact on the world.
Boom. Exactly. They want to know what to do, how to do it, why it's important. Big trifecta there. What to do, how to do it, why it's important. It's got to be super clear. It's your job as the boss to make it clear. And they want to experience what Daniel Pink called autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Again, there's some overlap there. Autonomy within clear boundaries. You tell me what the rules are, I will go chase things down. As long as I'm within the rules, I'm safe and I can be creative and entrepreneurial even. I can try new stuff. As long as I color within the lines, I'm golden, beautiful.
I'm stopping you right there, though. Not in terms of the unique personalities, not everybody, that's not going to look the same for everybody. And that's, again, the important piece, right? Some people will require you to give them the S
and the C are wildly different from the D and the I.
Exactly.
Yes.
Some of those styles will require the box. Here are the box dimensions to play within, just to have a bit of structure to work from. Otherwise,
now is this in millimeters? What about tenths of a millimeter? I want to make sure that I got the box down to the millimeter. Yes. Like, and the eyes are like, box. Oh, okay, fine.
Exactly. Right. 100%. That's exactly where I was going with that. Perfect. Yes. So definitely. So the autonomy within boundaries, those boundaries will be different from one individual to the next, depending on their style. And as a leader, it's your job to take the time to map that out and to understand them. What better ways?
Ask and really notice their answers and what they're not saying and what the people around them are experiencing them as. See, your job as a boss, as a manager, is to get the best out of each person individually and to get the best out of the team as a group of people who are capable of synergy, but who may not get there on their own.
Exactly.
That, in fact, let me give you a rundown. Here's what you as a manager are on the hook for, I think, if you're going to be an awesome manager. Number one, you take 100% responsibility for everything that your unit does or fails to do, whether you know about it or not. Boom. First time I heard that, I thought, no way.
Accountability.
That's too much. And then I realized, no, wait, if I embrace this, then I'm allowed to ask for status reports. I can say, got to keep me in the loop. Because when you take on responsibility, it comes with power. And the only thing you can ever steal without negative repercussions is responsibility. So I recommend doing that. Number two, ensure that the unit delivers its results. The whole purpose of a unit is to deliver results. The purpose of the manager is to manage the unit and deliver those results, right? So that the organization has one point of contact with the unit, one person who's responsible for that unit's performance. Number three, ensure the morale and the culture of your unit are positive, that people master their duties as individuals, that they grow their skills over time, that people are able to manage their conflicts peer-to-peer most of the time, constructively and professionally. And I have a process for that. Build highly trusting relationships with each of your direct reports through asking, listening, including coaching and encouraging, to ensure that all your subordinate managers manage with excellence the same way you are, to build and maintain constructive and high trusting working relationships with your peers and with your own direct supervisor, and to raise concerns in a timely fashion to your supervisor when you can't solve it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thomas, I want us to touch a bit more. I have some questions, but I feel like in the spirit of time, I'm not going to be able to get back. I'm assuming that all of this discovery and all of this wonderful, these frameworks, these ideas, these kind of very, very helpful strategies are what happened between 2005 and now, because we didn't really ever finish that. So that's where you decided to start kind of deep diving and developing.
the 18 years between discovering I was doing it wrong and figuring by 2014, I'd come up with what I call the best boss framework.
Awesome. Perfect.
And
So
yes,
best
and that's
boss
what I've been doing.
framework. Okay. I wanted to close the loop on that one just for our listeners. Awesome. Best boss framework. Feels like you had the experience of being that toxic boss that fueled you to then develop a framework. A lot of what you're talking about resonates. A lot of what you're talking about is the same stuff that we're trying to help people understand. To be a good leader, you need to have accountability. To build a high-performing team, that performance is rooted in that accountability, collective accountability, as well as leader accountability. To build a high-performing team, you need to have that trust. By those 5 steps that you talked about in terms of creating psychological safety directly translates into high levels of trust and directly translates into people engaging in productive conflict and having conversations, and translates ultimately to higher performance, to higher productivity, right? So a lot of what you're talking about is 100% resonates with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about on other episodes. If there was, you talked a lot about your framework for your leadership. The best boss framework is what you were just sharing, right?
Right.
I'm assuming that's exactly what it is.
That's the stuff.
That's the stuff. And it's so helpful. What about if we were to, just for the remainder of this episode, talk a bit about employee performance? You alluded to it earlier, where it's really difficult when we do have that lower performer, someone who's not pulling their weight.
Yes.
What are some of the, let's talk a bit more about that. How do you manage that low performer? Because let's be clear, tolerating that low performer is also giving a message to your high performers. So in order to avoid that, what are some of the strategies that our listeners could implement when they have noticed a poor performer? That was a
right.
Way. That's a lot of people.
It is. So, okay. We already agreed that as the manager of the unit, you're responsible for the performance of the entire unit and of each. You're responsible to, but not for the actions of each person reporting to you. Mm-hmm. So what does that look like when you want to confront performance problems? And the reason you have to do it is your high performers get really resentful when they have to pull twice their own weight because you're letting somebody else slack. It's like we're all in a boat and one person's not pulling an oar, but they're still there weighing down the ship. Mm. It's like, I got to pull twice as hard because you're not.
I've been on that team. In my career,
your job as a boss is to confront problems. Yep. And you're not doing your job. And we're all sitting here like waiting for you to please get around to confronting the problem.
And that just festers and it festers.
And it lowers my morale, lowers my performance as an individual contributor. It makes me want to go look for other options somewhere.
Makes me check out. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you will find that nothing improves the high performer's performance like you challenging your low performer. And by the way, one of the most common reasons why people don't challenge that low performer is they're worried about harming the relationship. They're very relationship oriented people often. So kind of like the I's and the S's will tend to lean that way. And what you don't realize is you'll actually build your relationship by making that person feel seen, because they know they're struggling too. Most likely 80-90% of them, if they're struggling, they know they are, and they're like waiting for you to say something and you're not saying anything. And I'm getting more like waiting for the other shoe to drop. That does even worse things for their person. So go talk to them. And if you want to prevent performance problems, I'll give you my 7 steps for avoiding the performance problem in the first place. Number 1, normalize talking about performance. Normalize talking about excellence. And the easiest way to introduce this in your organization is you divide people up into their individual roles, like the busboys are over here, waitress staff's over there, the cooks are over here in your restaurant. And you say, so cooks, what does it mean to be excellent as a cook?
What does a high performer look like? What is that?
Yeah, like what is excellence in general, and for us here in this environment, whatever, Friendly's restaurant or what have you. I used to be a grill cook at Friendly's restaurant.
I can tell you with definitely a restaurant background.
A little bit. Yeah, my dad was at Kentucky Fried Chicken for many years. And so, okay, so what is excellence? And I coached a young woman who inherited a bunch of receptionists to manage as part of her ever-growing portfolio working for a city government, because they didn't have a manager. And they're like, well, she's really smart and up and coming, and we'll give it to her. And she's like, I don't know anything about reception. I said, you don't have to, they do.
Yeah.
have a staff meeting and ask them, so what does it mean to be excellent as a receptionist? And let them educate you and each other. And he said, oh, okay, I don't think there's any point to it, but whatever. She gave it 10 minutes on the agenda. 45 minutes later, they are just getting warmed up to this topic. They love it. They have a lot to say to each other and their boss about what it means to be excellent. And so what came out of that conversation and subsequent conversations was a definition of excellence that they had created. I said, guess what? They've just given you permission to hold them to it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Step one.
They'll always uptake and buy into what they've had a hand in creating.
Yes. And he's like, okay, you can say, look, what's getting between you and excellence? What's stopping you? What's your struggle? How can I help? What do you need?
Yeah. So step one.
Normalize performance conversation through the what is excellence discussion. Number two will be to really get into the details of, okay, so excellence is what for receptionists? These 5 things. Okay, what does each one of those really mean though? Like how could an observer tell if it was happening or not happening? Give me 3 levels: extraordinary, good enough, and not good enough. What would I see and hear at each of those levels for these? So you got like the core 5 behaviors, you got the 3 levels. What would I see and hear? It takes some time, but this is what they do all day. They're not uninterested. All right. And now they are creating for you the cutoff below which you get to put someone on a performance improvement plan, because here's excellent, here's good enough, here's not good enough. Now in 3 areas, you're good enough. In none of the areas are you excellent, but in 2, you're not good enough. You really need to improve, which gets us to the next step, which is, okay, if that's what you see and hear when you're getting it or not getting it, what are the process steps to follow to achieve excellence in that specific area? Dishwashing, seating people, whatever it is. And you're pulling that out of your best performers. You're talking to your internal and external customers about what they want from this role. Now, this seems like a lot of work, doesn't it? Guess what? This is your job. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're here to deliver the performance of your unit. You are defining that performance in detail.
Absolutely. Can I just come back to the second step? And it's where I find a lot of organizations, when they're developing their performance development or their performance management or their annual appraisals or their evaluations, they have very different names everywhere. But ultimately, they'll make a Likert, or, from 1 to 5, but they won't define the behaviors that would warrant the 1 versus the behaviors that would warrant a 5. You need to be as clear as possible and develop a guide for each of those competencies, capabilities, skills that you're saying, if this is the level that we expect, this is the cost of admission for this role within the organization, then we need to be very specific in terms of how we quantify and what are some of the behaviors that would demonstrate and would warrant you being there. Because then it tells you exactly how you can grow into that next level, to your third point, right? It tells you exactly that path to that next point. So they need to revisit their existing models to make sure that they are providing that level of detail. But I love your idea of get that level of detail in terms of behaviors from your people. Where is it that we've seen a lot of success?
Partially from your people, partially from your customers, and some of it's going to have to come from you. The good news is, I can recommend an extraordinary book called How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard, 3rd edition, best edition. And I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version of this. Is anything that you care about in business, anything at all, you can notice whether you've got more of it or less of it, if you've got it or not got it. Somehow you can tell. Because if you can't tell whether you've got it or not, it can't be that important. Well, what about customer engagement? How do you define that? Well, okay. You say customer engagement, super. Lori's off in her closet getting something very interesting. I bet it's a copy of the book, right?
No, I wanted to show you a book as well, but it's okay. I still hear you, and listeners can't see me when I'm not talking. So
I understand. I just had to tease
not have known.
I'm modeling, noticing what people are doing in my meetings. So anyway, there's some result that's important, and you can say, okay, if I had a whole bunch of it versus not enough of it, what would I see and hear differently in these 2 cases? And that's where you start to find out what your observables are. And people will say, well, yeah, but I can't really measure that. And that's because you're using the wrong meaning of the word measure. A measure is anything that reduces your uncertainty. And I'll give you an example. Everyone's like, well, but I can't put a number on it. It's like, well, okay. Have you ever had a 3-star meal? Have you ever had a 1-star meal? You kind of know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now can I make a 3-star meal out of 3 1-star meals? No, but yet, so I can't add them together, but they still, the metrics have meaning, even though they're not like units you can add together. Okay.
Absolutely.
So my point is that you can define 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star experiences in terms of observables without worrying too much about, but it's not precise enough.
Exactly. No. Absolutely. And we're going to put the link to the book you just shared, but the book I was grabbing is actually words and phrases. So once we've defined that there's a specific competency, it has a bunch of behaviors and it's already written for you of what the behaviors of a sub behavior would look like, what an in development kind of behavior would look like, and what a fully assimilated excellent excels at this behavior looks like. So there are resources out there, and happy to put that link in the books in the show notes as well. But there are resources out there to help you define that, but it's really important that you take the time to define them. We are way over time, so I'm going to get us to go through the rest of these 7. I think we're at 3 or 4 now. So
okay, we just got kind of the 4th. So you're normalizing talking about performance, like what is excellence in this role. You break it down into some component pieces, some specific deliverables, and you talk about, well, how will we know if we've got enough of it? What will you see in here? And you start to turn it into levels of like truly excellent, good enough, not good enough in each of the, say, top 5 things that the role does, because you don't want to go crazy. It's not 27 things. Okay, that's too much.
Exactly.
Operationalize that into what are the steps someone would follow in order to at least get to good enough? And what are the additional steps that get us to excellence? And you talk to your top people, you talk to your internal customers, you find out, like, have them do some of the work, right? It's not all on you. And then when you've got those process steps, you can say, okay, I want all the bus boys, I want you to elect, a couple of spokespeople, and you're going to go talk to the wait staff and the cooks and so on and say, look, here's our promises that as bus boys, we are going to deliver awesome bus boy service across these 5 behaviors. And here's excellence. What are we missing? How are we doing? Where do we need to improve? And the group asks that of the other roles. And then you also normalize the individual saying, hey, how can I do better? Because people are really defensive. Like, I see a way for you to, Lori, I think you could do a better job as a host here. I'm going to tell you all the things you're doing wrong and how you can do better. You feeling receptive to that, Lori? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Depends on your character.
I'm an I, so I'm like, yeah, sure. I can continuously
bring it.
Tell me, bring it.
Yeah. But not everyone's that open. So what you want to do is, again, normalize this idea that, well, we're all trying to improve. And I, as your boss, I'm going to ask you, what's one thing I could do better as your boss? If you can't think of it now, I'll ask you again next week. But every so often, I'm going to say at the end of a staff meeting, hey, if there's anything I can be doing more of, less of, differently to improve your followership experience working with me, let me know what it is. Either right now here in the group or one-on-one later. Just let me know. Hey, thanks. Now I'm asking for it. I'm modeling it. Guess what? Now I'm going to say, hey, Fred, I need you to go talk to Barney and ask him what you can do better as a busboy. Just to see if he's got anything for you. And I've modeled it. You've seen it in action. I didn't burst into flames. I didn't die. You can do it too. It's just one-on-one little conversation. Just ask him for one thing. If he's got a list of 5, that's too bad. I made the mistake once with my girlfriend at the time. I said, well, how could I be a better boyfriend? And she rattled off a list right off the top of her head. It was a long list. Number 1, I should have asked for the top thing. And number 2, I'm not going to remember all this. And number 3, and she's going to expect me to change now that I've asked.
Assimilate the information she shared. Yeah.
And
ask for one. Yeah, absolutely.
Ask for one. And so you've now got your individuals asking their internal customers and peers, what's one thing I could do better?
Yeah.
And
what would have made this experience better when you're talking to the client?
Right. And if they're not willing to do that, then I get something else to confront them about. It's like, look, none of us are perfect, but we're all trying to get better. But I don't see you trying to get better, dude. You're not willing to ask how you can improve. What's wrong? What's up? What's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And it
allows them to take ownership over their working relationships. It facilitates communication and it makes it okay to have those conversations and to gather that data and then to start to improve on it. I love that one. Yeah, definitely.
And people love mastery. And when people get closer and closer to mastery, they stop wanting positive feedback because they can already tell that they're doing okay. They've already internalized that. What they really want to do is, what's one thing I can do to get even better?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And you want people out of the journeyman phase, out of the novice phase, where like, am I doing it right? And you're like, yeah, you're okay. You're doing good. Like get them through that with a lot of positive reinforcement, encouragement, get them up out of the, from 0 to 1. Everyone needs a lot of encouragement and help. It's like, it's going to be fine. We all suck at the beginning. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
And then, okay, now to get from 1 to 2, you're in journeyman phase. And it's like, well, I think I can judge my own behavior now. I think I can judge my own results. Yes. Am I right? Am I judging this right? And then, okay, then they get into mastery. It's like, I can do this in my sleep, but I'm going to do better. I'm going to take it to the next level. Okay, cool. How are you going to do that? That's how you lead performance without having to get into a performance improvement plan. And by the way, if you ever have to do a performance improvement plan, all the work I just described is what you have to do anyway. You got to define performance. You got to break the role into its top 3 to 5 pieces. You got to say what's excellent, what's good enough, and what's not good enough. And you got to tell people where they are in each of those areas. And then you got to have the process steps of here's what you do to get better.
Yeah, this is how we can get you to get better.
Boom.
This is amazing stuff. I don't mean to cut this short, but we are not cutting this short. We're in fact like 20 minutes over what I normally run. So I think it's super, super, super helpful. I love the strategies. I like that you're very specific in terms of how to do it. It's actually why I hate the term evaluation assessment. I prefer performance development because it's an ongoing exercise and it's a conversation. It's a tool that managers and leaders can use to help develop, to help pull out that full potential from their team members. And so I'm loving everything you're saying today, Thomas. If there was one nugget of wisdom that you would like to leave with our audience, if there's one thing you really would like them to walk away with, what would that be?
I would say this, everybody wants the same subjective experience of their boss. And when you realize what that is and you start giving it to your subordinates, they will become the team that is unbeatable.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And if people want to continue connecting with you and they'd like to hear more, how can they go about just
go to the website bestboss.biz, B-I-Z, bestboss.biz, no hyphen, BESTBOSS.biz. Yeah.
Awesome. And are you on any social media they can connect with you?
I lurk on LinkedIn a little bit. That's about all.
Look on LinkedIn. Perfect. So folks, we do encourage you to go to the website and check out what other resources are available on there. We will have we'll try and capture those different frameworks that we're sharing.
I have a cheat sheet if you'd like, we can make available to folks.
That would be wonderful. If you could have that cheat sheet available, we are more than happy to add them as an attachment, or if there's anything you need
free download.
Absolutely. Free download. We can get that done. And so thank you, Thomas, for all of these amazing nuggets of wisdom. And folks, I want you to digest, take the time to crystallize everything you heard today, and maybe even reference the show notes as a reminder after you're done listening. But ultimately, I need you to think of one thing that really resonated with you, one thing that you could actually implement. And then I need you to go ahead and do just that. Thank you so much. And
tell Lori about it.
Of course, tell Lori about it.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.